Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the most dramatic developments on the global stage, Russia openly challenging Israel's actions and asking why the world seems to be in shock. This isn't just another momentary flashpoint. It's potentially a shift in alliances, in norms, and in how global powers position themselves in the Middle East. Let's unpack what's happening, why it matters, and where things might head from here. To begin, we need a quick sketch of how Russia and Israel's relationship has evolved, and how recent events escalated tensions. For years, Russia and Israel maintained a delicate but functional relationship. Russia has strategic interests in Syria, Iran, and the broader region, and Israel has often communicated with Moscow to avoid direct clashes in Syrian airspace. As one observer put it, Russia once viewed Israel as one pillar of its foreign policy in the Middle East, building on cultural ties and geopolitical calculations. But that arrangement has frayed, especially since the outbreak of war in Gaza and wider regional escalations. In recent months, Russia has begun to break from its traditional posture of neutrality or quiet diplomacy, and instead has publicly condemned Israeli actions. In April 2025, Russia told the International Court of Justice that Israel's conduct in the occupied Palestinian territories is contributing to a crisis of legality and humanity. Middle East Monitor: the Russian argument is that Israel, as an occupying power, must comply with international humanitarian law, the Fourth Geneva Convention and Hague regulations, and that Israel is failing in its duties. Middle East Monitor: that is a strong rebuke, especially from a state that often positions itself as a counter-Western power. Then in June 2025, Russia sharply condemned an Israeli strike on Iran, calling it unprovoked and illegal. Reuters +1: that statement went beyond rhetoric. Russia framed it as a breach of the UN Charter and expressed concern over escalation and regional stability. Reuters: some analysts viewed this as a turning point. Russia was no longer merely criticizing, it was actively aligning itself with Israel's adversaries, or at least signaling disapproval of Israel's military behavior. But Moscow didn't immediately back its statements with overt military support, highlighting both the limits of its influence and the constraint of juggling multiple strategic fronts. The Washington Post: so why is the world reacting with shock? First, because the narrative is changing. Up until now, criticism of Israeli military actions, particularly in Gaza or the West Bank, has often come from regional actors or Western critics. A major power like Russia stepping in so openly disrupts that dynamic. Second, the move adds fuel to a perception of shifting global alliances. If Russia challenges Israel, that reaches beyond the local conflict. It suggests Russia is signaling to other nations that it sees Israel's posture as a legitimate object of scrutiny, perhaps even of confrontation. Third, it underlines hypocrisy and double standards in global responses to conflicts. Many Western governments have strongly condemned Russia's actions in Ukraine, emphasizing sovereignty, civilian protection, and international law. But when Israel acts in Gaza or against Iranian targets, the response is often more muted or justified under the rubric of self-defense. Critics see this inconsistency as weakening the credibility of a rules-based international order. Russia's criticism leverages such contradictions, challenging the West to act consistently or admit they won't, and that puts pressure on international institutions like the UN and the ICJ. Another dimension is strategic alignment. Russia today relies more heavily on cooperation with Iran, especially for drone technology and political backing, as its war in Ukraine drags on and Western sanctions bite. Brookings +1, if Russia is deepening ties with Iran, then criticizing Israel's main adversary, is a natural step. Some analysts argue that Moscow sees an opportunity to reposition itself as a key power broker in the Middle East. Tablet Magazine +1, that may also be part of a messaging strategy to tell regional players that Russia is no longer passive or aligned only with certain blocs, but willing to take strong stances when it sees violations of international norms. Let's pause and reflect on the risks. By antagonizing Israel, Russia might fracture old channels of cooperation. In Syria, for example, Israel and Russia have long maintained deconfliction protocols, mechanisms to prevent unintended clashes in airspace or ground operations. As relations sour, those agreements become fragile. Israel may refuse coordination, and miscalculations could lead to dangerous military incidents. Another risk is that Russia expands its role in direct conflicts as mediator or participant, drawing it deeper into Middle Eastern instability. That could stretch its military and diplomatic bandwidth, especially given its ongoing war in Ukraine. At the same time, Russia's criticisms may embolden other states to demand higher standards from all actors, including Israel. If more nations adopt a posture of legal accountability rather than moral exception, Israel may face greater pressure in forums like the UN, ICH, and other diplomatic arenas. Already, Russia has participated in the ICJ hearings condemning Israel's actions in Gaza, framing its case as one of legality and humanity. Middle East Monitor and recall that Russia has vetoed UN Security Council resolutions unfavorable to its views on Gaza. In 2024, it rejected a ceasefire resolution that didn't mention Hamas, further painting the West as complicit in double standards. The Guardian +1 now, how is Israel likely to respond? Israel may choose to push back diplomatically, rejecting the legitimacy of Russian critiques, contesting Russia's interpretation of law, and rallying its allies to isolate Moscow's position. It might also take steps to reduce reliance on coordination with Russian forces in Syria, reinforcing its ability to act unilaterally. But Israel will also be cautious. It doesn't want a new adversarial front with Russia while already juggling complicated regional pressures. From the global perspective, this shift invites several possible trajectories. In one scenario, we see escalation. Russia amplifies its diplomatic attacks, supports rival states more robustly, and perhaps even projects military capability closer to Israel or in contested zones. That would force Israel to adjust militarily and diplomatically. In another scenario, Russia's challenges become largely rhetorical, meant more to shape narratives than to cause direct confrontation. The reason is simple. Russia already has heavy commitments in Ukraine and elsewhere. It cannot afford a full-scale showdown with Israel unless it chooses to accept high risks. In that case, Russia's challenge may serve as a warning shot to Israel and to other powers. It's also worth noting how the global public is reacting, or evolving, in its attitudes. Research suggests that public opinion toward one conflict can influence perspectives on another. In our interconnected media environment, Russia's critiques of Israel may resonate with audiences that previously saw Israel's actions as untouchable. As if, in effect, the shock many feel is because the rules of global criticism are shifting. Powerful states are no longer off the table. Finally, the most important question: what does this mean for the people living in the conflict zones? Russian statements, however politically motivated, may generate increased pressure on Israel to temper its military actions, to open humanitarian corridors, or to adhere more closely to international norms. But rhetoric alone won't stop violence. To make a difference will require enforcement through diplomatic pressure, legal consequences, or coordinated international action. That's a far more difficult leap. But if major powers like Russia begin treating Israel as any other state in terms of accountability, even symbolic shifts in perception can have ripple effects, raising energy behind humanitarian efforts, shifting alliances, and legitimizing calls for restraint. So, in sum, the world is in shock not simply because Russia is criticizing Israel, but because Russia is doing so from a position of power and with intent. It's drawing a line in the sand. It's saying that military might does not exempt any state from scrutiny. And in a time when many feel global norms are eroding, this moment feels like a recalibration. Over time, whether Russia's challenge becomes a real turning point or remains a dramatic rhetorical event will depend on how bold Moscow is in following through, how Israel reacts, and how other powers respond. What do you think? Could this mark a new era in Middle Eastern geopolitics? Let me know in the comments.